Hi everyone, this podcast is sponsored by Robots Ruin My Life. Be sure to use the link in the description below and use code RoboCast at checkout for 25% off your order.
Hey there, everybody. It's Luke from Team Copperhead, and you're listening to the RoboCast.
Hello everyone, my name is SamElliot64 and welcome back to the RoboCast with myself, Steve the American Killjoy, and World of Woodrow. And joining us today, as you would have heard from that extremely passionate intro, is Luke Quintal from Copperhead. Luke, welcome. How are you?
Thanks. Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I love the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you to say. And we love your robot, and not just the big one that's been doing really well this year, but the smaller ones in the, Kitten Mittens.
All of the things.
Literally all of them. Like, they're all so cool. Like, what?
Oh, thank you.
Honestly, they inspire a lot of good chemicals. So, yeah, thank you very much for providing some uniqueness to the scene. I think we'll start, first of all, with your season to date, which looks a little like this. Talk us through the pre-season fights. Obviously, the first two were extremely short. The fourth one was a little bit short as well. But why don't you talk us through a little bit about your season to date?
Yeah, I mean, I think between those four fights, it might have been like 60 seconds with all of them combined.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not a lot. We had viewing parties for each of these fights, and people are just like, "What? That's it?" Like we watched the 2 hours. We watched the 2-hour show for 10 minutes, 10 seconds of content.
It sounds like you're watching like UFC, like the main title fight is like 30 seconds and all the stuff leading up to you, like, it's coming. It's like, well,
yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's that's on our opponents. If they can't last more than 10 seconds, then so be it. But
whoa.
But no. A lot of these robots, all these robots come from incredible teams. It's just I think. But they're all brand new robots. So that's the thing is, it doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are, how good of a builder you are. If you have a new robot, you're going to have problems no matter what. There's just no way around that. So I feel like, as far as the draw went, we got pretty lucky. I mean, Copperhead, we've been competing with this robot this is the 4th season. So anything that's broken on that robot, we've seen it before. We know what to expect. But all these other teams here, it's all new to them. So they don't know what they're getting into. Our first fight there was against Bloodsport. So now, they got the weapon motors and everything on top of the blade. Everything's brand new. That fight, I know they fixed a lot of the problems. So like, if we had to fight them again, it probably wouldn't have been as easy. I think the top half of their robot was like 3D printed out of nylon. And that just exploded on impact. So as soon as we had the fight with them, they went back and they remachined the whole thing out of aluminum in like 24 hours in preparation for their next fight. So they learned the hard way what worked and what didn't work. And if we had to fight them again, I don't know, it might have gone a little bit differently. I mean, in that fight, I don't know how much detail you want to get into these fights, but
what would you say, other than, which one was the scariest on paper for you guys, do you think? Looking at the four of them, there's a lot of kinetic energy going on here. Was the kind of one you highlighted at the start of the season thinking, ooh, fancy that?
Well, I said that the Bloodsport fight kind of set the tone, and that was that this season was going to be real rough. In the Bloodsport fight, we, in the very first thing, it was just one hit. One hit was the entire fight. And we clipped the bottom of their blade, but as the blade was coming around, it came and it hit one of our uprights on the frame rail. And that just completely destroyed one of our frame rails, which is a pretty big deal. Because up until now, the only time that's happened was against Kronos, maybe like 3 seasons ago. And we don't just build new frame rails. All the major components of Copperhead, at least the structural parts, were built 4 years ago, and we haven't made any more of them. So to have one of our frame rails get annihilated in the very first fight, we are now down to 1 robot. So on their very first fight, we went from 2 fully working robots to 1, which is not a good way to start the season. So after our very first fight, we're like already running out of spare parts, which was just not a good sign. And it kind of set the tone for the season it's like, yeah, we're doing great, but
at what cost, sort of thing.
Yeah, Copperhead is getting very tired. After 3 years, it's getting tired. But we're gonna try try our best to get this thing working to the best of our ability. So that was tough. And then of course, like the next fight there where we took major damage was against Ripperoni. I thought we could get around to the side of them. I really underestimated how well that anti-gyro worked. The amount of maneuverability that a robot has with that much kinetic energy is just really, really unnerving. I did not expect them to be that maneuverable. I thought, the rest of their frame is fairly chintzy. It's not super durable if you look at it. I think the entire frame is like 1/8 thick steel welded together. It's compared to Copperhead, it's relatively thin. So I thought if we could just get one hit on the side of them, we could rip off a drive side or something like that. But that is not how it went. They were able to match our movements, hit us in the back of the robot. And within the first collision, they had already disabled one, if not both drive sides. So what we learned from that fight is just never let anyone get to the back of Copperhead.
Yep.
So the rest of the season was just like, no matter what you do, don't let them hit the back of the robot. And
easy in theory, difficult in practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we learned in the pre-tournament fights, was just play to Copperhead's strengths. So the front of the robot is near indestructible. The back of the robot, not so much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other fight, we'll kind of move on to your other fight, which I haven't kind of included this one because it's strictly in the tournament, was against Rotator, who we've kind of highlighted over the year. There is a question about it later, so we'll get to it. But Rotator is genuinely, I think one of the scariest machines in the field, and it seemed like a struggle. Like he started off really strongly, then one of the sides died. What happened? Do you know what happened in that?
Yeah. So there's a story to this, and that is. And it all came down to the Ripperoni fight. So when we lost to Ripperoni, they smashed in the back of the robot, and it happened to be the same drive side that got destroyed against Bloodsport. So unlike just swapping out a frame rail, we couldn't swap out frame rails anymore because we lost one frame rail to Bloodsport, and then Ripperoni just they didn't destroy, but they did significant damage to that side of the robot. So we had to take the whole robot apart. We had to replace a drive motor, drive speed controller, and I forgot that Vesks are awful. And you have to calibrate each motor to each Vesk. I just took a random motor and a random Vesk, and I just threw them in the robot. I loaded in the profile that we had used, but I forgot to do the motor calibration. And I don't know if that's ultimately what caused the problem, but we knew that there was a problem right before when we loaded the robot in the test box. Before every fight, you put your robot in the test box, you make sure it works. And what I noticed is I'm driving around and the robot seems to be working fine in the test box, but then I just bump into the wall and the entire drive side just cuts out. I'm like, oh no. So like,
not like this.
Yeah, if you just tap the wall and your drive side cuts out, like what's gonna happen when Rotator hits it? Like
exactly.
So and then but what I noticed, the speed controller would reset. It would take about 2 seconds to reset, and then it would start working again. So we do talk about this in our we do recaps of our own fights each episode, and I do go into this a little bit more detail. But ultimately, what happened is after every collision with Rotator, our right drive side would cut out, and eventually halfway through the fight, the speed controller just exploded, and then we started to crab walk. So we were having problems before the fight even started. But we spent probably like 2 days nonstop working on Copperhead after the Ripperoni fight. Fortunately, the day after Ripperoni was a fix-it day, so we had more time to prepare the robot. But we thought we had the robot ready to go until 5 seconds before loading in the big arena.
Oh, no.
And I didn't want to delay production. Like, we have never delayed production, and I hate when teams do that. And I was also just really mentally exhausted. Like, I wasn't really prepared to just, talk to production, tell them we have to delay, and then spend the next like 5 hours replacing a new speed controller and a new motor or whatever it is that the problem was. So we're just like, whatever, just throw it in the arena, hope for the best. And it didn't go great. People are like, oh, Copperhead's drive died again. Usually, which, is fair. That is a fair statement. But usually when we lose a drive side, it's because like a chain breaks. We have like, even in this picture, you can see we got big old chains, very exposed. Those are what usually get hit. And that's usually why we lose a drive side. But in this case, the speed controller just gave up on life. And that was a different failure mode that we hadn't really encountered before. But I mostly attribute it to just my lack of knowledge of Vesks. So we did fix that for the next fight, but I think that's ultimately what the issue was for Copperhead.
Sounds like a Rory Mangles to the Vescu job.
Hey, shout out to Rory. I think like the Monsoon team needs to get like 2 extra hotel rooms or more build stipend, because Rory single-handedly made this season 10 times
He
better.
saved the event. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So many teams run these Vesks, and it's
Yeah, we would like Rory actually made our weapon way better this season. We use the same 75-300 Vesks that a lot of teams use. But we've been running these speed controllers before most teams had, and we were one of the early adopters of HFI. But the early versions of HFI in these vests did not work well. And we always had this issue where sometimes in the beginning of a Copperhead match, our weapon would spin the wrong direction. So, which is just a complete waste of time. And it's a waste of, energy and spin up power and battery power and all this stuff. So eventually we talked to Rory, and Roy's just like, oh, put the new beta 6 on it and recalibrate it. And after Rory worked his magic, the weapon has never worked better. So shout outs to Rory.
What a guy. What a guy.
Rory to the rescue once again.
As always.
Yeah, BattleBots needs to just hire Rory on. Like Rory Vesk Whisperer should be a paid position at BattleBots, because it makes the show way better. Like,
I was just say, at the end of the day, the show is only as good as the competitors, right? And if the competitors are better, then
it'd be wonderful if on the dark day, before filming even begins, everyone has to be in their pit areas, and they just stand Rory. They just stand Rory in the arena, have all the cameras and microphones on him, and he does like a TED talk to the rest of the pits with all the screens and everything about how they're going to.
I know he'd hate that though. He would hate that.
They need to award him like a golden Vesk at the end of the tournament. Just something to put on his shelf.
I mean, considering how important it is to tune these speed controllers, like we have the Lincoln Electric guys, like they're awesome. They fix the mechanical bits that are weldable. But then on the other side of it, like you need to have someone like Rory. I mean, there are some teams, Rotator in particular, this was their first season running brushless weapons. And Victor, this is like Victor's first go around with Vesks, and he was having some serious spin up problems himself. Rotator actually this entire season was intended to run 2 weapon motors, 2 speed controllers, but Victor could only get it working with 1. So if you think that Rotator looks a little bit underpowered, it's actually just because Victor couldn't work out the brushless gremlins. And I don't know like if you ever reached out to Rory, but I feel like had he done that, Rotator could have been twice as powerful. So it's so essential to have good knowledge in programming these crazy speed controllers.
Absolutely. We have, once again, sourced the internet for some listener questions for yourself, Luke. We're going to start off with Tenny on Discord, who asks, is there actually any copper in Copperhead, and how many sacrificial snakes remain and have died so far this season? Okay.
Is there any copper in Copperhead? Well, to be accurate, there is copper inside of the motors. I believe, isn't it? It's copper windings, I think, are the phase wires. But other than that, there is no
all the wires.
The wires. Other than the wires, I think that's about it. So there's nothing else in Copperhead. I think the first season we had Copperhead, we spray painted the drum copper, and we told people it was copper just to mess with them. We're like, oh, copper, it's very dense. Copperhead's a very dense robot. To get the maximum density, we use the copper weapon just to mess with people. But no, there's really no copper in Copperhead. It's mostly just steel.
You need to have like a tip. Go ahead.
UK coins and
I was gonna say like they need like a coin slot to make like a Copperhead piggy bank and just put pennies in, even though that's mostly zinc. But whatever.
And then what was the other question about? What was the other question about the snakes?
How many remain and have died so far this season?
Oh man, so like. Early on in Copperhead's life, like I didn't have like a huge role on the team. Like I mostly spent time, like battle hardening motors, making chains. I was just kind of like support person. But
being
when
the puppet master with the snake head.
Yeah, I did some puppet stuff. I do enjoy the puppets. I was just a helping hand. But eventually we decided that this is kind of my decision was we wanted to have like a mini bot, but we didn't want to spend that much time, and we didn't think we could honestly pull off like a useful mini bot. Copperhead's usually right at the weight limit, so the mini bot would have to be super light. And a lot of our mini bots were actually inspired by Kraken's Wally. I thought Wally was like the best mini bot of all time. It's just meant to like make the show more interesting. It doesn't do anything, but it helps the theming of the robot. And if it gets destroyed, it's something that looks spectacular on camera. So that was kind of for the mini bots. It was really like, we want something that just shatters into a million pieces when it gets destroyed, just to add a little bit more to the TV show. Some of these robots are so durable that it doesn't really come across on TV how destructive these robots are. So like now, like in Destructathon, like they destroy, like a slot machine. So that actually kind of puts in perspective like how powerful these robots are. And having our little baby snakes get destroyed was one of our design like aspirations.
Was it last year when Witch Doctor lands on one? That was like the best slow-mo shot I've ever seen in my life.
I don't think like a lot of people didn't see that, but like at the time we were running 2 baby snakes per fight. This season I think they outlawed that. Like there was some, it wasn't because of us, but there was some team that ran multiple mini bots and it caused some issue. I think like Gigabyte ran like 2 D2 kits and that became a problem or something. I don't know why. It was dumb. But we used to run 2 baby snakes per fight. And when we fought Witch Doctor, we uppercut Witch Doctor up in the air and they just landed directly on 2 baby snakes and it just exploded into a million pieces. And it was glorious. We lost that fight, but it was amazing. So I think each season we probably bring like 10 of those baby snakes, and I would spend like $300 a season just hot gluing these snakes. Just on the snakes. So that was kind of my contribution. Was I came up with the baby snakes, and it's literally 2 RC cars glued together. One RC car is like the snake carcass, and the other RC car is this little 2.4 gigahertz 4-wheel drive thing. So yeah, we go through like 10 of those a season, and they're more expensive than you think. They're like $40 each. Just 2 $20 RC cars to get hot glued together. But we love it.
So you should.
Very cool. Martin Dithers on Facebook. As someone who is up way too late tonight, I guess when he wrote this question, what was your experience with the late nights at the event, and how did they affect your experience there for good or for bad? I mean, we did have the Weekend and Bernie's event, but you seemed to get through that fight just fine. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, prior to Ripperoni, we didn't work on the robot that long. I mean, historically, there's usually very little work to do on Copperhead. It's kind of just like a brick of a robot. But after the Ripperoni, well, I mean, that's not true. I mean, after the Bloodsport fight, we swapped out to a new frame rail, but we had a frame rail to just swap out. So that wasn't a huge deal. But then after Ripperoni, they also did damage to that frame rail, which means now we really got to get our hands dirty. So we had to bend parts back. We had to re-weld things, and it was a ton of work. It's not something that our team's used to doing. And our team is pretty small. After, I think at the time of Ripperoni, we only had like 4 people on the team. We had like myself, my girlfriend, we had Chad New, and we had Jonathan. And so and my girlfriend, she's great, but she doesn't work on robots. Chad's great, but Chad spent a lot of time. He had his son there, so he spent a lot of time just looking over his son. So then we had like Jonathan. So our team was really, really running lean.
And Chris and Lindsay were only there for the first week, I think.
Yeah, I think at this time, I think like after the Ripperoni, I mean, they might have been there for Ripperoni. They were there for Ripperoni, but when it came down, that was right about the time that they were leaving. And they don't have a lot of experience working on heavyweights. They're great to have on the team. They were great, but as far as like fixing the bot, they didn't play like a huge role in that. So it was tough. Like we took a lot more damage this season than we ever had. And that led to some really long nights, which is kind of why I didn't see a lot of the fights. Like, so we would just spend like countless hours fixing the robot. We'd make sure that we had everything Loctited the night before. And then as soon as we got the Loctite in the robot, it's just like, all right, go back to the hotel, go to the pub, or just go to bed. that was it.
Yeah. For new robot builders, of course, you think like, oh, Loctite, it's just good. Put it in the arena. No, it needs to set, because otherwise it turns into a lubricant in a way where it doesn't really work.
Look, listen, I was having drum problems, and the teeth kept flying out.
I didn't mean that.
No, it's fine. It was last year's problem. This year's not going to be a problem.
No,
I've decided.
There you go.
I'm glad. My question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Daniel Smith on Facebook asks, We often see teams struggle when changing captains, such as Valkyrie and Gigabyte this season. How have you made sure to stay consistent, or at this point improve with Copperhead, having had several changes of captaincy over the years?
I mean, I've been fighting. I mean, as far as like driving the robot, I've had a lot of experience driving smaller robots, and Copperhead actually drives a lot better than most of the robots I built. So, between like gyro walkers,
Mittens looks
gyro
so
walkers,
easy to do.
Torque reaction robots, like these robots are barely controllable to begin with. So when you get good at driving a robot that is barely controllable, then Copperhead is not that bad. Heavyweight robots do drive really slow, so they're really sluggish. So some of the driving changes are you just have to anticipate them driving like a boat. A lot of people describe these as like driving a boat because there's just so much mass and inertia. So you have to kind of foresee how the robots drift around the arena. But for the most part, it's not that bad to drive. As far as like working on the robot, I did very few changes. There were some changes I wanted to make to the robot. The previous captain, Robert, made some great improvements to the drive. Bigger motors, bigger speed controllers, more robust drive. But there were a couple things that I didn't really like. Like some of our drive pods were mounted using standoffs, but he went with these nylon standoffs because he thought like, oh, it's some kind of like shock absorption. But Copperhead was never designed to be like a shock mounted robot. Everything in Copperhead is very rigid. And I think some of that shock mounting actually didn't really help that much. So I replaced like these nylon standoffs with machined aluminum standoffs. I welded some extra tabs on the top plate to brace the back of the robot in case it were to crumple in. I thought that would help against Ripperoni, but Ripperoni just smashed right through that. So I tried to make the robot better, but it wasn't strong enough to hold up to Ripperoni. So I made a couple tweaks to the robot, but really not that much has changed. I mean, we've been evolving this robot, at least the internals, for 3-4 years. So a lot of what makes a robot good is just the attention to detail, and it's just taping your connectors, your wire routing, padding things correctly. And so we have a lot of experience doing that. So, we've been running the same robot for 4 years. We should know what works and what doesn't work at this point.
Yeah,
absolutely. Two questions. Well, two people asking the same question were Ivan Roy on Facebook and Jack Simpson on YouTube. And they both ask, what has been your favorite tunnel walkout this season?
I think our favorite tunnel walkout. So the first 4 tunnel walkouts were kind of all Chris and Lindsay. They came up with those, and they would come up. Well, the first 4.
Weekend at Bernie's might have been somebody else's idea.
Who could it have been?
Had many long chats in the pub.
I might have had one too many to remember that. So if you had a hand in that, then thank you. But
anyway, of the RoboCast copyright.
Yeah. I forget what happens in the pub sometimes. But my favorite walkout was definitely the Ripperoni one.
Yes.
It was. They were throwing out these wacky ideas, and that's their department, so I'm not going to tell them like what we should or shouldn't do, but they're like, yeah, like let's get a pizza box, and we'll push you out, and on the count of 3 just pop your head out of the pizza box and just looking around, hey everybody, I'm a pizza. So that was pretty wacky, and it was great because that ended up being the main event. I don't even know if they told us that was a main event fight, but that ended up being a main event, and I think a lot of it might have been just because of the amazing walkouts. I mean, the Ripperoni team had a great walkout themselves. They got a great theme, but they weren't popping out of a pizza box.
Exactly.
So.
No, exactly. Just weak theming. I quite enjoyed this week, to be honest with you. The super long forks.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I mean, Endgame is known for their fork configuration, and so we put some sunglasses on, and I don't think did they even show our walkout? I don't know, but I don't think they got.
They should this week.
Yeah. We put the longest forks on we could possibly do. We ended up I think it was made out of duct tape, and I think
I was going to say foam core or duct tape. It looked like,
yeah. And then I found out I think we gave those to Mary Catherine Carr, super fan. So I think she has those now.
Yeah,
nice.
Absolutely.
Shadowscope FSM on Facebook. Did you and the endgame teams have a moment of reflection that both of your perfect preseasons were blemished by pizza?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are like, well, if Copperhead beat Endgame and they both lost to a pizza, then that pizza should be like a top 8 robot. And I'm
There
like,
you
well,
go.
I can't lie with,
Oh, it's invisible.
I can't argue with that logic.
There you go.
But no, I mean, Ripperoni is an incredible robot, super devastating, super powerful. But to be fair, I think if Endgame were to fight Ripperoni again, I feel like Endgame would probably win.
Yeah, I want to see it.
But yeah, I mean, Ripperoni's great, but like Endgame, they lost to themselves. I mean, they drove their forks right into the kill saw slots, and then Ripperoni just teed them up and just blasted them into space. I was laughing.
How could you not?
I was laughing so hard when I saw that happen, and I was just so excited for the Ripperoni team. Because Endgame had it coming. Like, if you play the ground game the same way that they do, you deserve to get stuck in those kill saw slots.
Yeah.
They can't keep getting away with this. And, and sure enough,
we said it on the podcast.
Why did they box rush? I don't understand.
I don't know.
Yeah, we said it on the podcast previously, but right before this fight, we were actually up in the stands with Lindsay and Chris and said, look, one day Longforks will come up and scupper somebody, and then sure enough, it happened almost immediately after that. And just before that, Lindsay had said to me, choose chaos. and sure enough, there was the chaos.
Yeah. I was so sad last week's episode, Ribbot versus Quantum. Man, I felt so bad for Quantum.
Don't rip open old wounds, man. I'm still
upset. Man, like they did it to themselves, and the Quantum guys are just like, oh, just leave him there, just let him get counted out.
We said last week they're too British. They're too
they're too nice. Yep.
Oh, need that killer instinct.
Absolutely.
Anyway, like a snake.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Craig Danby, never heard of him, asked, is it true there's a place in a man's head that if you shoot it, it'll explode?
I read this question before this interview started, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what Craig is talking about, so I assume
he's really got his own thing going on.
I assume yes.
As soon as I saw it, I was like, I've got to include that because either there's a story behind it or like it's just gonna baffle you.
Yeah, if there is, I don't know it. So,
everyone, do your own research.
Sorry, Craig.
Don't try this at home.
Do not try this at home.
It's like we're watching Scanners, right? I mean, right? You know, because the guy's head explodes in the book. Anybody ever seen that movie? Come on, guys.
No, sorry. I'm bad at films. I'm really sorry.
It's the 80s, man. I love it.
I'm sure you probably can guess what the last question is before we move on to the episode itself. It's from your teammate Chad. And Chad asks, have the female fans been able to stalk you yet, or indeed the male fans?
Yeah, unfortunately, BattleBots demographic is mostly men. So if I had to say I had any super fans, they are men. No ladies have reached out to me. Thankfully, I know my girlfriend is worried about that, but I don't think she should be.
All right, well, hey.
We will have more listener questions throughout the episode, as we tend to do. But in the meantime, should we talk about some fights?
Oh, yeah.
Do it.
As always,
this
is first of all, again, this is round of 16 territory. Massive spoilers. If you haven't already watched it, go and watch it, and then come back. Let's start off with Ribbot.
Animal cruelty.
Ribbot and Black Dragon. You wait 25 fights for Black Dragon to get knocked out, and it happens twice in 3 fights, right?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
This was the second to last fight of the round of 16 recording that we saw. I think. Yeah, it was. I'm a little surprised at Ribbot going for the vert again, but I suppose at this point they've kind of got that setup dialed in the most. And I think the horizontal was done.
Oh, really?
From what I can remember and what I heard, I think it was kind of they could use it, but they preferred to use the vert at that point. After they'd spent so long trying to get the vert working, it is probably their more dominant setup. And against a robot like Black Dragon that has an answer to that, I mean, they took Tombstone to the judges and beat it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a horizontal against Black Dragon, probably a bad call anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Luke, I imagine you were elbow deep in Copperhead at this point, but any thoughts on the fight itself? It was
I didn't most of these fights I didn't watch until I watched it on TV, so I don't have a lot of insight. I think Ribbot's horizontal I think they smoked their motors like in the very first fight, like really early in the season. For Ribbot, I mean, Ribbot used to be one of the 2 teams that ran ultra high voltage weapon setup. So I think Ribbot used to run like 250 volts on their weapon. So they spent tons of time developing their own speed controllers and their own motors. But this season they implemented a new rule where I think the maximum voltage you could have is like 16S, which is like 60 volts or something like that. So I imagine they had to scramble to redesign a lot of their weapon motors and configurations.
Yeah.
And I think early in the season that might have played a hand in what ultimately smoked their horizontal motor configurations. So I think that's why we saw a lot of the vert being their primary configuration this season.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's working quite fine.
Yeah, I mean, it worked, didn't it? Really,
I love everybody online I've seen going, "Oh my god! I mean, Ribbot didn't deserve to be here, and now it's bodying all the robots. It's not fair." It's like
Hydra again, right?
Do you remember Ribbot last series?
But sorry, just like, it's the Ribbot trap again, because they won again.
It is.
At every single fight.
People need to stop sleeping on Ribbot. It's a good robot. It was top 4 last year.
Was it? You sure about that?
Top 8? I don't know.
Round of 32.
It was top 4 seed.
Yeah, it was
top 4 seed. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
and it lost in the round of 32.
Yeah, lost to Hydra.
Yeah, to Hydra. Yeah. Top 4 seed is what I meant. It was one of the best robots in preseason 2021.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's one of the scariest machines still going. And an underdog Ribbot, a Ribbot with a chip on its shoulder, is a very scary prospect.
Is it an underdog though? It's not really. It's the number 30.
Just by the number. Just by the number.
Just running the bracket and having a wonderful time doing it. Like,
yeah. On the flip side, I mean, obviously, a previous opponent of yours, Luke, in Black Dragon, a robot which this season has, I think, slowly wore it down, and I think just run out of steam at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great robot, super durable, a very experienced team, but I think their team also changes hands quite a bit as well as our season. So I don't know if maybe some of the reliability issues are just a matter of it changing hands, maybe not having some of the legacy team members on their team that know the ins and outs of the robot. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it is pretty surprising to see them get knocked out twice. I know that the show really plays that up a lot.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, oh, we've never been knocked out. It's like, well, how many giant nuts have you won? It's like they have all these crazy statistics that I didn't even know they were keeping track of, but they really played that up a lot for Riptide.
yes, they did.
Absolutely.
I think they were from what I'd heard, they were struggling for parts post Riptide, and they sort of run down what they had brought. Let's
look at who else they fought. They lost the side of drive against Monsoon, I think. They were kind of lucky that Monsoon did the thing. Yeah. Who else did they fight? They lost against
Quantum,
but it wasn't really I wouldn't call it a loss. I'd say it was kind of a stalemate, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They kind of unfortunately
they beat Beta,
and they beat. They lost to Riptide, didn't they? That was it.
Yeah.
And then obviously they took an absolute pasting from Ripperoni for basically the whole fight.
Oh, man.
Caught fire and somehow ended up falling face first into victory.
So
and
they weren't already struggling
after Riptide.
Post-Riptide, they then were on fire against Ripperoni, and then Ribbot's the next. Yeah. And you got to think, blimey, just give us a break.
Yeah, they spent this whole fight losing every exchange. I don't think they won a single exchange in this fight, which is, I mean, it's a testament to Ribbot's front end, I guess. That fork setup worked really, really well. I think they drive it, exceptionally. David's clearly a master behind the sticks, and I guess Julio didn't. Julio's the one that drives Black Dragon, correct? But I mean, they just could not, they couldn't keep up with the frog, and the frog moves on, and the dragon gets to go back and sleep in its cave until next year.
Absolutely, a good season for Black Dragon, though. Yet another round of 16. It's nothing to.
It's a robot that has really grown on me since it first came in sort of 2019. I thought it's kind of Route 1 egg beta revert type.
Well,
thing.
It's the perfect blend of all weapons, right? It's everything. It's drum. It
is the perfect
egg beater.
It's in the middle of the Venn diagram. It's up there in the middle because it's been everything and it does everything. But its design, I think, has been the big key point for me this season, and sort of starting last season, where it looks like a. I was saying this about the new Slammo that Prager's built. It looks like a character. It looks like a cool design that could become a toy. And the same can be said for this version of Black Dragon. It looks very cool. It's exactly same for Ribbot. In speaking to them previously, it was a case of because they kept changing their looks that they haven't had one.
The livery keeps changing. It's kind of hard to make a brand, but if they stick with this, I think this could be
a frog, not a chameleon.
This would be a cool set.
Yeah,
interchangeable weaponry. Come on, Hexbug, we could do it. I think
they've done it before.
Not make it too expensive.
Yeah, we'll see about that one. Ribbot moving on to the round of 8.
Yeah.
Fight 2.
Speaking of drumming things up.
Well, I mean,
they've never fought before until now.
I think it is kind of interesting that these two have been here for 7 years and have done so many fights. Each of them have kind of, but I suppose
it comes as a bit of a surprise that there's an actual fight in this sort of area of the tournament now, where there's robots that haven't actually fought each other, because a lot of them just are rematches.
Yeah.
And this is another fight where we don't see the pseudo Gearcrow feet forks.
So
I think
that's a shame.
I don't know
maybe one day we'll see them.
There is a beautiful set of photos that create a wonderful GIF of the moment Witch Doctor smacks LockJaw into Spitfire and takes it out.
Or Spitfire,
Witch Doctor just great at sniping Spitfire with bits of other robots or just whole other robots. It's awesome to watch.
Well, Luke talked about it earlier, where it's like it's cool, and I think that's the reason why Spitfire's still around. It's a fun little robot to watch fly around the arena, and it's like, what's it going to do? What kind of trouble is it going to get in? Is it going to get sucked and paper shredded in the screws again, or is it going to get shot but with another piece of like when Sub-Zero, where just a piece hits and just twats it out of the air, and it's just so funny. But it's just fun, and it's nice to have. Yes, the fire doesn't do very much, but it's it's cool to
it's theater, right? It's theater.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, Luke, I don't know if you got anything else to add to this fight. It was very cut and dry, I felt, from Witch Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually fought both of these robots. Our last fight last season was against Witch Doctor, and then that same season we fought LockJaw. That was actually I drove in that fight, and that was a really exciting fight for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, both incredible teams. Donald Hudson, one of the amazing roboteer. I think he has some of the best attachments you could ever put on a robot, like the one in this picture that I don't think we've seen.
Nope.
But yeah, I mean they're both incredible teams, very destructive. I think this could have gone either way, but Witch Doctor got it.
Witch Doctor did get it.
I really want to know what robot Donald has to be fighting to put these forks on, like
fusion.
Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the how to beat a rotator or a fusion. This is Donald's plan.
Yeah, so that can be a wedge or a plow, and can also fork underneath you
and deflect weapons. Hopefully,
it's an interesting idea.
I've seen it. I'm
all over it.
Yeah, I'm like a clever
Sam Elliott for Team LockJaw 2023.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
As for go on.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, as for LockJaw's season as a whole, they've really. Last season, I felt so bad for that team because obviously they went 0-4.
Yes, yep.
It's such a nice return to form.
Let's face it, they had incredible opponents throughout. This is just me saying this
awful
because
luck going brushless as well.
Yeah, but it isn't just me to say this because obviously Luke's here and he fought them. But it was Hypershock, Copperhead, Blip, and it was Ribbot in the Bounties tournament as well, wasn't it? So 4 robots which could easily win the championship on their day, and this season it's kind of been like a return to form. What you're more likely to expect from a LockJaw, and they've come up against a top opponent, Witch Doctor, who let's face it, is also
has been one step shy for however many years.
Exactly.
Yes.
You can't complain at losing to Witch Doctor, can you? Steve, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just I mean, Witch Doctor did not give Donald a chance to breathe in this fight, and I think that's the perfect fight for Mike to drive. Just keep them rolling, keep hitting them even when they're flipped upside down. The final hit maybe was a little too much, but it's the end of the tournament, so it's like whatever.
I don't know. It's in the heat of the moment, you don't really know if they're still moving. You may as well hit them one more time. It's coming down, right? It's still kind of, I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering the fight.
Extra gratuitous violence. Looks good for TV, but hey,
It was one hit. It wasn't 3 or 4.
I agree. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too hard, but still, if the line is there, we gotta make sure that every team meets that line.
Witch Doctor can do no wrong. If it was Riptide, the internet would have gone crazy.
You know it.
Luke, I'm trying to dance around the topic. Don't do this to
me. We'll get to them later. Come on now. We'll save it for later. But we have Witch Doctor once again moving through to the round of 8. It's just it's inevitable, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
They just keep coming.
I think it's just a matter of time. I have them picked to win the start of the season, and they really are proving to be a force. And you know what? They had their one loss, but it's similar to Huge and to Minotaur. Well, Minotaur did have that fight against Cobalt where they had to sweat a little bit, but like they're just doing their business, and it's just things are just going, and they're just having a good old time at BattleBots, and everyone else is just there to be fodder.
What I will say is they posted a video this week about how they're running low on spares as well. The fusion fight apparently took quite a lot out of Witch Doctor's.
Yeah, I recommend anybody to go and watch the Pit Pass series they've been doing on YouTube. It's been really interesting to hear just everything behind the scenes for this team this season. And, after each fight, they go through the damage. And there's some decent damage after most of the fights, but definitely
the weapon motor, right? I think that was the main thing that was the problem leading up into this fight. Like, Witch Doctor looks pristine almost after that fusion fight, but on that last hit, they suspect that they lost the weapon motor. And
the Witch Doctor team actually came to our pits and asked us about the weapon motors. As far as I know, Copperhead was the first team that was using the new NEU weapon motors. Great motor for combat robots, pretty pricey, but a lot of teams have since adopted them, including Witch Doctor, Hypershock, a bunch of Rotator. We all use the same brand of weapon motors, so we're kind of we've have a lot of experience using them, and we know most of the failure modes of the motors. But the Witch Doctor team came to us and they showed us their weapon motor, and like the magnet ring, like the flux ring, like had separated from the motor bell, and I'd never seen that before. I'm like, how the heck did you guys do that? Like that is insane. And I told them like, well, I don't. We've never had that problem, but I don't think they were like, we put a ton of epoxy in our motors, and I think maybe that's why we haven't encountered that particular failure mode. And I think after they had showed us what their motors look like after the fusion fight, I'm like, yeah, like we'd never seen that, but we put tons of epoxy in our motors, so maybe you should do the same. So I think after that, that's something they started to do.
Gotta battle harden it, man. Yeah, every brushless or brush motors, you gotta find a way that it can't come apart, because I would love
you think.
Yeah, I would love this to be a sport where you can just take your motors apart and fix them, and that's the other. But sometimes it's just you got to just make it as hard as possible, and then if it breaks, there's more to come. There's like put another one in there, and then put that to the side, and hopefully maybe one day I'll take it apart.
I think the new motors are great combat motors in general, but like you said, like nothing is combat robot rated. You still have to take it apart and look at it and like, oh, this doesn't look right. Put some epoxy in there. You got to do it.
Absolutely. Belt and braces
enough times, you're not going to be able to take it apart anymore. It'll just be stuck together in just this mess of goo and metal.
The Witch Doctor team, like they used to run all the mag motors, and they would buy like 20 of those things like for one season. Like they would smoke 1 or 2 mag motors like every single fight, and those are like $500 motors. Yeah. So it's like I saw they're sponsored by Mag Motor, or at least they were. So I guess it's not a big deal. But I'm like, man, you guys are spending like $2,000 per fight just in brushed motors. Like,
yeah.
Hey, when you can, why not?
I mean, they're a super professional team. They're one of the top, like as far as what they go through to get ready and like how they run their pit. Like they're one of the most professional teams. And if the solution is spend money, like they're gonna do it. So they'll do whatever it takes to win. And I have full faith that Witch Doctor can do what they need to do to be as competitive as possible.
The sport is becoming more and more like stock car racing or like F1, like where you need a really good team and a really good pit and being able to adapt on the fly, and being able to fix anything that you didn't expect to break out on the track or in the box. There's interesting parallels there.
Absolutely. There sure is. Fight number 3.
Yeah.
Malice versus Minotaur.
This had no business being as good as it was. I'm sorry. No, this had
awesome. Daniel worried in the opening. Like it did. I don't know whether he ever gets that worried, to be fair, but he didn't seem to be fully on his game after being turned over by Malice. I think there was a lot of like underestimating your opponent there. And Malice started the fight.
I'm in that camp. I underestimated Malice going into this fight.
I don't think it's just that. So from my understanding is, well, I don't know if anyone's seen about the weapon pulley on Minotaur, but basically Malice shattered Minotaur's weapon pulley, and that's why it wasn't really spinning up properly towards the end of the fight. I don't know when this happened. Obviously during the fight, but I don't know when exactly it happened during the fight. And basically, according to the team, it's the first time it's happened in 20 years, which is incredible. The fact that Malice was the one that was able to do it, and the way Malice was causing damage at the start, you're kind of thinking, "Oh, okay, this is how it's going to go down." But
Big Red hits hard.
It does.
Yeah. I'm so glad they used Big Red. I feel like they've been using the drumstick and they've had some success, some really good success with it. But this was the fight to bring out the big meaty disc.
Well, I feel like this is just a good setup in general against a drum, because it's got that big. It's a thick sort of surface area that it's not flat, but it gives that edge that robots with drums struggle against, and you know. I mean, it worked out reasonably well at the start of this fight.
Yeah, until the tooth gets ripped out and the weapon stops, and then
he gets turned upside down.
Daniel does his Minotaur thing and just goes to work.
Absolutely. Luke, do you watch Minotaur at all and kind of try and draw inspiration from it? Because obviously, you two are the two big drum boys, aren't you? Let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody compares Copperhead to Minotaur, and Minotaur is definitely more popular than Copperhead. Yeah, I mean, Minotaur is incredible. I mean, they've been competing for like 20 years, you know, with Daniel Freitas as the driver, so he has tons of experience. The team is super experienced. Minotaur is a tank, and it rarely breaks, so to see them have their weapon pulley explode is pretty unprecedented. But Malice, I mean, this fight really showcased like Malice can do some serious damage. I mean, there's a lot of energy being stored in Big Red, and I was blown away on those like first 3 impacts. They won all 3 of those encounters and just blasted Minotaur across the arena. It was so incredible to watch. But yeah, I think ever since Malice was first built, they had issues with like the bearings inside of their weapon. They had issues with like belts breaking and the bearings exploding in their weapon. And I know as time has gone on, they've improved it. I know even for Robo games, Bunny has been working on improving the reliability of the weapon tremendously. They've experimented with different bearing setups, different belt setups. I think they're even trying to switch out to bushings. So if they could just make that weapon a little bit more reliable, it would be a top contender for sure.
I mean, it's getting there, right? Like, but previously, I've never really kind of looked at Malice and thought, you're going to win BattleBots, because like there's always been something in the back of my head thinking, eventually it will break.
Yeah, there's always something, you know, one glaring weak spot somewhere.
But like after this fight, I've watched it and I'm thinking, well, if you're doing this to Minotaur, and if you could do it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, then yeah, you're gonna. If you could beat Minotaur, you could beat anyone basically, and it's very impressive to see. And the team has really kicked on this year after a difficult sophomore season last year.
Yeah.
Yep. If their weapon kept spinning, they would have won for sure.
Yeah. The fight really turns when Malice gets pinned
turned
against
over. I think it's when it gets turned
over. Yeah. And I was gonna say pinned against the upper deck, and we get some gratuitous advertisement. If you could really scan that QR code at the bottom, it looked a little bit roughed up. But you know, they almost had their Hypershock moment. And then even with a shattered pulley, you say, Sam, it's Minotaur still hits hard. It was still spinning up and still tossing 250 pounds into the air. Maybe not as high as they normally have, and they did a good job surviving those first 3 really big hits where David Lau drives this robot directly into the front corner of Minotaur and just sends it, and does it again on the second hit, and then the side hit
massively well over this season. He's just got better and better and better.
David Lau actually probably has more stick time than I think I could safely say this. It's either Jameson Go or David Lau. Those are the 2 competitors that probably have more stick time than any other builder. By far. It's probably a tie between the 2. I mean, Jameson spends a lot of time at Norwalk, but David Lau used to go to every single robot competition in the United States. Him and Bunny are currently doing a tour, a robot combat tour, where for 6 weeks in a row, they're going to a robot event.
That's
so
awesome.
If there's a robot event, Bunny and David will be there.
I'm scared of doing 2 back to back. Let alone 6.
That's couple goals right there, man.
Yeah.
Let's go.
It really is. We've kind of said already about Malice, has really kicked on this season. It's really picked up from, I said, a difficult season last year. They kind of struggled to keep up with the pace. I think the caliber of opponent they had last year, kind of fed into that a little bit, but they've properly stepped up this year, and it shows a lot. So from getting battered by Emulsifier at the start of the season, you're thinking, yes. Oh God, it's going to be another one of those years where they kind of fell into victory against Emulsifier. But since then, it's really gone their way, and fair play to them. Good for them. Yeah. And next fight, well, Luke, I'm going to let you just talk about this fight, because, Copperhead versus Endgame. Yeah, go for it.
This fight was there was a lot of fun conversation leading up to this fight. The night before we had this fight, well, first of all, Copperhead, there wasn't a lot we could do to prepare. Copperhead has essentially 2 configurations. It's a standard configuration shown in this photo, or if we fight a horizontal, we'll just weld a bar that ties the forks together. But that's pretty much it. That's all we can do. We don't have any secrets. We don't play games. Meanwhile, the end game guys, they have a whole tent set up in their pits so they can work on their robot in secrecy. And then when they go to the battery tent, they cover the front of their forks with a tarp. So even when they're putting the batteries in the robot, you can't even see what they're doing. But for us, it doesn't change what we do. When we see them load into the arena, maybe our strategy might change a little bit depending on what fork configuration we see them doing. But for us, our robot, we have no secrets. So, but the night before this fight happened, we were at the pub, and we had all the Roboteers come to the same place, and it really annoys the staff. So they're just go into the back room. We don't want to see you. So we took this private room where all these robot builders came, and we were having dinner. And I
remember that night.
Yeah, there was I was sitting right next to Ray Billings, Brian Nave, and Emmanuel, and we're talking about the strategy for this fight. And we essentially had 2 strategies. Our first strategy was just hide behind the kill saw slots and see if they come.
Absolutely.
That was our first strategy. And we're well, if even if we need time to spin up, if there's a time where we need time to spin up, it's just hide behind the kill saw slots, because I know for a fact they're not going to drive over those. Mm-hmm. And it takes time for somebody to drive around them, and you run the risk of screwing up driving. Mm-hmm. So we're well, the first strategy is we don't get stuck in the kill saw slots, so we could drive over them, wait to spin up, and maybe we can use that to our advantage. The second strategy was purposely hit them while upside down. So what we were thinking is what we've learned at this point is the front of Copperhead has pretty much never broken. It kind of has a little bit in the past, but we'll just say it's never broken.
Semantics.
Semantics. Kronos did rip us open once, but
there you go.
Other than that, the front of Copperhead has pretty much never stopped spinning for mechanical issues. We've had a speed controller explode before, but for all intents and purposes, the front of Copperhead's near indestructible. So we're well, we don't know. Endgame actually, if you look at their setup, they got these aluminum uprights. There's only so much bearings you can put in that thing, where Copperhead has literally super thick weapon shaft, 6 gigantic bearings. And we're just if we go weapon to weapon while upside down, it'll be a double impact force, and we might just destroy the bearings inside their weapon. It's a crazy strategy. In the beginning of the fight, we're well, we're not going to purposely run upside down. And I didn't know how to make the weapon spin down. There is a way to do it, but I'm I don't want to mess with the Vesk. I don't want to screw the transmitter. But I'm we're probably going to lose a head-on collision. We'll probably get flipped upside down. But if we do get flipped upside down, I'm not going to gyro flip the robot over. We're purposely going to run into them at full speed while upside down to have the biggest possible impact of all time.
Or
that
so
was kind
you
of
thought.
our strategy. Or so we thought. And it was kind of funny because we're having dinner at the pub, and I'm I've had a couple drinks, and I sound like a crazy person saying this. Because
I'm sending my robot into the slaughter. It's gonna be great.
What will happen? What people think is oh, you're spinning down, they're spinning up. It's just going to send you flying across the arena. And I'm yeah, I get that. But they're going to hit us where we're strongest. And as long as we're not getting hit in the butt, I think our robot will be okay. And it was so funny because I like turned to Ray Billings. I'm like, Ray, what do you think? He's like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And then I like look at Brian Nave and he's like, actually, I think that's a pretty good idea. So we have like half the people are like saying it's a good idea. Other people are like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. But like, what are you gonna do? We're fighting Endgame, so it's like
you gotta try something different, right?
You gotta try something like a normal just. And when you watch the fight, like we lost all of the first 3 encounters. We are just getting blasted across the arena. Like we had a viewing party, and we're hyped. Like this was a couple of days ago. We had the viewing party. And like my parents came into town, and we have like, we got like 50 people all like glued to the TV. And in the first 3 hits, everyone's just like, like this is not looking good.
Did you invite me to a funeral, or what did you do?
Yeah, everyone is just like staring at me, and I'm still smiling. So they're like, what's going on here? But on that 3rd hit that Endgame did, we were fully spun up. I drove into them while upside down, and it just annihilated the bearings inside of Endgame's weapon. So it kind of went, the strategy was perfectly executed.
Oh, yeah.
And like, I don't even think we really took, we did take some damage. I could talk about the damage, but like we essentially took no damage. And at
what
that
point during the 9 flips you took? Because each time it hits you, you flip like 4.5 times in the air and still land perfectly fine somehow.
It was incredible, but like, as soon as their weapon went down, it was just free pickings. We took off all of their forks, and then in the very last 10 seconds of the fight, we knocked them on their face, and that gave me time to like do some showboating. There was broken glass everywhere in the arena. Like, I think at the end of the fight, Chad New was just like, sorry about all the glass. Like there was so much broken glass in the arena from all the forks flying off,
hitting all the lights,
hitting the ceilings. We must have broke like 10 lights. I've never seen so much broken glass in the battle box.
I mean, so they had their piano key forks on it. It's like 20 odd bits of fork that you can remove, and they were all gone. Yeah. And then you took off the mounting for them. And then you wrecked up the front. And then they tip over.
I was very surprised that they ran that configuration, because there are like pretty well understood ways of beating drum spinners as far as configurations go. I thought that they were probably going to do 2 really beefy forks. Like in the United States, we have a very popular kit, the D2 kit. And the D2 kit has 2 configurations. It has a wedge configuration for fighting horizontals. And then when you fight verticals, it has what they call the Wolverine forks, which are essentially like 2 super strong forks that have these barbed wires on it. And the idea is you drive it into a vertical spinner, they drive up it, and then they hit the barbs on the fork, and it causes the drum to tumble forward. And I thought that they were going to run a configuration like that, something that makes more sense to fight against drum spinners. But the whole piano key configuration, like I don't think that made any sense at all. And it just makes them look like they take significantly more damage, because like ripping off 20 attachments versus maybe 1 or 2, it doesn't make it look like you're taking as much damage. But like, when you just see every little bit of that robot flying off into the ceiling, like it's not a good look for Endgame.
Definitely not. I mean, we had a question from I'm going to pronounce this name horrendously, David Ortiz Grob on Facebook and Commodore Z on Twitter, and they ask, at what point did you believe he'd pull off the win? I'm assuming it's when their weapon just stopped, right?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as their weapon stopped, we're like, yes, but at the same time,
don't screw it up. Please don't screw this up.
We were also thinking like we took those mega hits. We don't know like what kind of damage we had sustained. Like the weapon was still looked to be working pretty well. But at the end of the fight, I just turned to Chad and I'm like, our drive didn't die. Like we were just waiting for something on our robot to break. Like I feel like we're cursed, where it's like no matter what we do, one of our drive sides will always die. And it did keep working. But we did sustain some damage, but it so what happened is in that fight, we only, Copperhead for the 4 seasons has only had 2 weapons. We've been using the same 2 weapons for 4 seasons. Endgame has enough weapons to run a new weapon for every single fight. Like they have like 20 weapons. We've been using the same 2 S7 drums for 4 seasons. And the drum that I used for this fight was actually our welded drum. So when we first built Copperhead, our first drum that came from the machine shop, it was not balanced correctly because it wasn't machined quite to spec. So we ended up welding a bunch of metal onto the back of the drum to balance it out, and it actually started to shatter the drum. So we quickly had to like take out an angle grinder, grind out the stress cracks as they were forming. We threw it in an oven. We broke Robert Cowan's oven doing that. So the drum was kind of defective, but it was the only drum that still had a sharp tooth on it. After 4 seasons, all of our drums were pretty chewed up, and this was the only drum that had a sharp edge on it. And I didn't think that much about it, but when we did that, those mega impacts that we did with Endgame actually cracked our drum. So this was the last fight that we could use that drum on, but the drum never exploded. It had a huge crack on it, but it still kept spinning. So I don't know if we had any more mega hits, weapon on weapon, maybe it would have exploded or something. So I guess we got kind of lucky there, but all we did was swap out to our other drum, which is our only remaining drum. And that was pretty much it, the extent of the damage. The rest of the robot was fine. So we got lucky there. Nobody expected us to win. I think on the builders poll, Endgame was had like an 80% chance of winning on the poll or something like that. So we were definitely the underdogs. I don't even think we thought we were gonna win. Copperhead's never made it to the round of 8. So at this point, I think we were cursed. We're like, oh yeah, our the only chance of getting to the round of 8, we have to fight Endgame, like one of the best robots of all time. So we're like, well, GG, good game.
I will say,
go on, Steve.
And then Jevin. But I will say there's a lot of moments in these fights where, like, we watched a whole bunch of them, and BattleBots likes their side view of the box where they have bots flying across the screen to use for highlight reels. There's one hit in this fight that I think they could use pretty regularly, and it's it's the hit where you get in and you just frisbee Endgame in the air and it just goes off. I think that'll be a nice one for
there's definitely going to be some stuff in the show reel. We haven't posted the fights yet, but like the photographer John, he gives all the builders like his the fight images he takes, and we're allowed to post like some of the fight images before the fight happens, some of the images after the fight happens, and we haven't posted the post Endgame.
I was going to say it's a little spoilery,
but yeah, that particular hit that you're talking about, he took an amazing shot of that where Endgame is just flying through the air while Copperhead is just like planted on the floor, and I might need to get that one framed.
It's just really it was just really cool
coming out.
Don't blame you at all. I'll ask one of the other list of questions I had for this section, which is from I'm going to pronounce the name poorly again. I'm very sorry.
You terrible names, man.
Simon Pager with a J in the middle. Did you realize that you were the first team ever to force Endgame to use its self-writer?
We actually,
the non-sunglass one.
They did have a self-writer with the sunglasses, and I don't think it worked when they fought. I believe it was Death Roll. I think. So that was the first time that they used it. I was really curious to see like how fast it would take to articulate. The self-writer on Endgame is actually really innovative. A lot of the Endgame looks kind of like a box. Which it is, but it has a lot of really impressive internals. I'm always very impressed with what the Endgame team comes up with, and they have a tiny little motor that actuates their self-rider because you want to make things as small as possible. But you can see in this picture, they have this gigantic spring on it. So before the fight happens, it's like the spring takes like 100 pounds off the robot. So before the fight, as it's loading it's like loading down 100 pounds. So then when it's actuating back the other direction, the motor doesn't have to work as hard. So I'd never seen anybody do that before, and I thought that was super cool. So we were all kind of curious to see how well that worked, and it worked pretty well. But it obviously it doesn't work when they're on their face.
No, it doesn't. Art imitates reality with End Boss over here in the Beetle weights.
They need like Exterminator 2 kind of post out the front to get that.
Possibly.
But that, of course, those would have to be behind the plates you ripped off, and it's whatever.
What they need is the sunglasses that they had in 2019, because they did articulate that way.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of like Jackpot. Jackpot has since have their self-riders are now kind of like forks that lift up as well, and I think part of the reason why they did that is so they don't get stuck on their face, because they have had that happen before in the past.
Correct. The other list of questions I was going to ask before we move on is from Twitter user Ace Trainer Banana, which is a great name, and they say that every season rotator that makes the bracket, the team that beats them goes on to win the giant nut. After this fight, do you now believe in the rotator charm?
we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier on, but yeah, I'd like a take here.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of forgot that was a thing. Somebody in chat, like on the BattleBot group, did say that. I was like, oh, I forgot that that's a thing. But after beating Endgame, like I was happy. I mean, we made it to the round of 8. That's the farthest we've ever made it. We took down Endgame and we did it in spectacular fashion. So like I was good. Like if we went home at this point, I would have been very satisfied. But as far as the is it a curse? The curse of the rotator win?
The anti-curse of rotator.
It's a curse for rotator, but the anti-curse for
Good
everybody else.
omens.
Good omens. I was feeling pretty good. I mean, thinking back, I was more worried about Endgame than I was against Riptide. And the reason for that is just because Endgame, they're very secretive and they have the ability to put any kind of attachments on their robot. So I thought that they were going to have a better attachment for a drum spinner, especially after losing to Minotaur last season, but they just went full out on the piano keys, which was quite surprising. But when it comes to other wide spinning weapons like Riptide cannot put any forks narrower than the width of their beater. So we knew that even if they did some kind of fork attachment, the forks would be wider than Copperhead's forks. So thinking about Riptide is I thought we actually had a pretty good chance of winning the head-to-head impacts, because what I thought would happen if hypothetically if we were to fight Riptide is we would go head-to-head, they would deflect off of our forks, they would pop up, and then we would have a chance to uppercut them, was kind of what I thought might have happened if we were to fight Riptide. Where if we fight Endgame, I mean, they can put any amount of wedge attachments on, which had me really worried, and rightfully so. We lost all 3 of our encounters head to head with them. So they definitely won the ground game, but apparently it didn't matter.
Or just run upside down and then just have a double impact.
Can't keep winning the ground game
if you've got no left.
I think after this season, what we learned is like spinning down could be like a pretty good strategy.
Honestly.
Absolutely.
Honestly.
We'll get to your next fight a little bit later on. We'll go into a little bit more detail with that. But
we're going to get through your opponent's fight, which is spectacular.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. In the meantime, then, we'll move on to fight number 5, which is Monsoon and SawBlaze. Hammer.
I understand hammer now.
Yeah,
good.
It is a shame. It is a real shame, because this was a really good fight. And I think SawBlaze did have Monsoon's number.
Yes.
However, there was enough there to make me think, Monsoon's not doing too bad here. Like, he got that first initial impact where it sent SawBlaze over was fantastic.
Definitely. It's a lot closer than you first think. I mean, SawBlaze put a post up on Facebook today to say, talk about the damage they had, and the arm was dead. Had the fight continued, had the wind's been blowing in a different direction that day, the arm was dead, and Monsoon could have stood a chance, but unfortunately, hammer.
Oh dear. Yeah, great fight, and dominant once again from SawBlaze. Since they've sorted those wheels out, I'm telling you, they're really starting to motor along now.
Yeah, it's a really it's a touching moment. Was it in this episode where one of their team members just falls apart on camera because they've had such a trial, and I've talked about it in past episodes where we've had just this epic of, will the wheels fall apart in the box? Will we lose traction? Will they hold up? Will anything work? Will the bot drive at all? It's been a crazy event for them, and it looks like they finally got something that works. Shame they had to figure it out mid-event, because that's probably the most stressful time to figure it out. But that's what happens when you come up with your own alloys of rubbers, and you can't just go to a battle box and drive around. It's very hard to simulate how coarse and abrasive the floor is for some of these tires. I mean, Luke, you guys run your own huge chonky rubber wheels. It's I know you have more rubber to burn in comparison to SawBlaze, but I don't know if there's been like similar struggles with you with traction and stuff like that when you guys have brought Copperhead, but
it's a really tricky balance, because you can when you're making your own wheels, you can kind of adjust how soft they are, which gives you more traction. It's the durometer. So you can go with a lower durometer for more traction, but that comes at the expense of less lifetime. So you kind of see this, especially like with like Quantum.
Yes.
If you see Quantum in a pushing match, you just see these blue streaks on the arena floor, and it's because they're running such a soft wheel compound, which means they have to replace their wheels every single fight.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky balance between how soft you want the wheels to be for how much traction you want, but it comes at the cost of durability. So you want to, these are combat robots. You want them to be able to take hits, but you need to have pushing power. So it's finding that right balance. And I think that balance is kind of what the SawBlaze team had been experimenting with this season. So I think this is the first year that they've done their own custom wheels, and there is a little bit of a learning process with that. It's tricky because it's not only do you have to determine how soft or how hard your wheels are, but it also comes into how much pressure your wheels are applying to the floor. If you have a much wider contact patch, you can go with a softer wheel. If you have thinner wheels, you have to go with a harder wheel, and it has to do with like the amount of pressure that you're applying to the floor. So it's tricky. It's not as simple as just slapping some wheels on there and calling it good. You got to do some experimenting and see how it works out. And it looks like the SawBlaze team figured it out for this fight.
Yeah, and this is much better than their fight in 2019, or was it 2018?
2018. Yeah, 2018. This was not. They're two very different robots to what fought then. I mean, SawBlaze has floppy forks now, and it's had all these years of iteration.
It's got a spinner now. It's got a hammer saw. It's not a cutting disc anymore. Yeah.
Monsoon has been iterated as well. These are two very different robots to what fought in 2018. And they still put on an amazing fight.
The amount of improvement that SawBlaze has had throughout the years is just incredible. I know like Jameson really liked SOB from the Comedy Central days.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think I can make this a competitive robot. And everyone's like, no, it'll never be competitive. And now there's like 6 hammer saws.
SOB made a final in the middleweight division last season. Get out of here.
He's obviously shown it's a very competitive design, and it's scary. I mean, SawBlaze is one of the most feared robots now. The effectiveness of the hammer saw is just unprecedented. It's crazy how destructive that can be.
I mean, even in the 30s, Megatron is like constantly top 3, top 2, top 1. It's a beast as well.
Yeah.
As for Monsoon, we'll do a little bit about Monsoon, then we'll talk about SawBlaze's next fight in a second. But Monsoon, great return to BattleBots, and
incredible.
A thoroughly deserved round of 16 birthing, I think.
The best bot from Britain to compete in BattleBots this year.
Yeah.
I don't think there can be any argument about it. I don't think
you could probably argue Quantum.
Yeah. Well, the writing's on the wall, right?
Can you?
The 16, Quantum didn't.
Quantum did not.
That is true. Quantum has more wins though.
This is true.
Doesn't matter.
But
yeah. Last week's episode with Monsoon against Cobalt. Holy cow! That last hit that Monsoon did just blasted Cobalt across the arena, and
the closest thing to an Uta we saw this season.
I was so impressed. That weapon is crazy powerful, and if Monsoon got the right hit on SawBlaze, it could have been over. It's so crazy. The strategies are so different for these two robots, where like SawBlaze has to drive perfectly every single fight to execute their strategy correctly. Where like if Monsoon landed one good hit on the back of their robot on a wheel, it could have been over for SawBlaze. So I'm always impressed with how well SawBlaze can execute their strategy. But at the same time, like the new Monsoon is way more powerful than it used to be. But at the same time, for them to make it more powerful, the robot is half the size.
Yeah.
So like they made the robot half the size. It's more compact. It's kind of like what Copperhead does, but that also plays against them in this particular fight. Most teams try to make their robots as small as possible to make them more energy dense. SawBlaze kind of goes the other direction, where they need a big plow, a big dustpan, and that makes catching small robots like Monsoon or Blip that much easier.
Yeah.
So
it's really interesting how like it's kind of evolved in that way. Like obviously, as you said, like there's so many small robots now, it's all playing into the robots like SawBlaze, and we'll get onto the fight in a bit with Huge. Like those two have kind of thought, no, let's not do that. We're gonna min-max another way, and that's why they're now starting to see a little bit more success. You know,
They
they're
really snuck up on everybody, didn't they?
Mhm.
yeah, they really did.
A little
Going big is definitely a departure from what people thought was the most competitive design. But depending on what you're doing, like dustpans, control robots, sometimes being extra big can definitely play to your advantage.
100%. SawBlaze has another little robot, well, relatively little robot next in Minotaur. Obviously, they had
Bit of
that.
a
We've
rematch.
seen this before.
They had that amazing fight at the start of last season, and I mean, the way that both of them are performing, it wouldn't surprise me if it was another amazing fight. I really
Yeah, I
don't,
would think
you know.
so.
Everybody online is just like, oh yeah, Minotaur is gonna take it. Minotaur is gonna take it. I'm like, did you guys not watch the first fight of last
SawBlaze made it
season?
look silly.
SawBlaze destroyed Minotaur.
They Swiss
Like, what
cheesed
are you?
it.
What are you think? What are you saying?
Yeah,
I
But you never
can't
know.
wait. I can't wait to see that fight. Like, you know, let's face it. You know, we can argue that Minotaur maybe were a little bit rusty going into that fight, but man, it's a tantalizing prospect, isn't it? Really, for those
They
two.
could win. You just got to get JMO flipping. If you just get him upside down and have him,
Have him
flounder around,
panicking a little
Yeah,
bit.
absolutely.
I think when Jameson's in control and he's steady headed, like he's one of the best drivers ever. But I think if you get him off kilter and get him a little bit worried, that's when mistakes can happen. So
Absolutely.
and it only takes one mistake for SawBlaze to lose it. So they, like I said, they have to execute perfectly every time to implement their strategy.
Yeah, we will see how that goes. Next up, we have another rematch in Whiplash and Hydra. Jake has been dreaming.
2020, this is not.
He's been
No.
dreaming of this moment. I know he has, because he's not that he's bitter. He's not bitter, but he must have been secretly really hoping he gets to fight Whiplash one day. And yeah, what's going on with Whiplash? Because to be fair,
I mean,
they were also running low on bits, weren't they? Because they had the chassis destroyed by.
there's a shot on the Hydra Facebook page of the underside of Whiplash.
It's just
the
all
amount of
broken.
patched up holes. It looks like a patchwork quilt. But for robots, it's the amount of damage Whiplash has sustained this season, and it's kind of been a bit unreliable this season to the point where, you know, the same sorts of problems have been rearing their ugly heads again in this fight, and it's like it's just unfortunate that they have beaten Hydra in the past. They are more than capable of it, but not this time.
No, I think maybe just one fight too many for Whiplash. They've had a rough preseason. Maybe got a bit fortunate that Beta beated the way it did, and kind of broke down quite quickly. But no such mistakes with Hydra. And I mean, even with Hydra, like every single floor seam, it was just like
I was gonna say, I think
every single one.
Jake, every time he starts in the blue square, he always hits that seam right before the blue B. Every time. It's just like clockwork. But
I can see why Jake wants something new. Like we had him on the podcast previously, and he was saying about wanting a change from playing the ground game because it sucks. And this fight
It's a struggle.
It speaks volumes. It's like,
Yeah.
I see it now.
I feel like he's going to come back with something that just can fly around the box. I think I think it would be nice to have something that you don't feel like you're stubbing your toe on every single, crack in the floor. We did see a little bit of self-mutilation from Whiplash. We're just like, I don't need this anymore on my arm. Gone. Because it was already struggling. I thought Matt had a good idea where when I think he realized he couldn't get them at the front, just maybe run backwards and do what he did with Bronco all those years ago, where just bring the arm over and hit him over the top. That might work. But at that point, I mean, Whiplash was already struggling, and then I mean the weapon arm all of a sudden wasn't lifting anymore, and it just became a 4-wheel vert, and Whiplash doesn't do well upside down. So
No.
Nope.
So that's where their trip ends. Much as we love our ceremonial fourth host of the cast, just wasn't meant to be this year. He's been a runner-up before, but this season was a tough one. I mean, it's tough not to have your second in command with Jason there. It's for a chunk of the beginning of the season, and I feel like that affected him a little bit. Maybe it's a lot of work for just him and his dad, and his
I do feel like all of the top
but
dogs, and I think Whiplash is a top dog, but
yeah,
I think they all have a season where it's just everything seems to not be going right. Like Tombstone had it in
LockJaw had theirs last year.
2020, LockJaw last year,
Witch Doctor in
Bronco
20
previously. Yeah,
18, yeah.
Witch Doctor in 2018, even Hypershock in 2020. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. All these teams.
Will just wants to have a nap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that this season has really been the season where I think Whiplash and Rotator are the two teams that have suffered most, with Gremlins just being ever present. And yeah, no, this was a tough one, but
Yeah, I believe this is Whiplash's first season starting to dabble with brushless. I believe
Yes.
the spinner on their weapon is brushless, and I know early on in the season they were definitely having some spin up problems with their weapon, which is a shame because they're one of the few teams that can really hit you where you don't want to get hit. They're kind of like a pseudo hammer saw, Matty Vasquez, like he likes to do that maneuver where they have the arm fully articulated back and they're ready to hit you where you don't want to get hit. And Hydra doesn't have a lot of armor. If you are able to hit anything on Hydra other than the front, there's a good chance you'll disable that robot. So
we saw it against Death Roll, even like burying the spinner into one corner of Hydra, massively limited mobility.
Yeah,
like it just does it in.
Yeah, it is a shame. As you say, Whiplash has been, one of the top machines for years now, and I think it still is. I think it's just been, as you said, like they've dabbled with brushless. Most teams, when they first go into that kind of brushless rabbit hole, it doesn't always work out the first year, but I'm sure next year we'll come back.
It never works. It never works the first year.
I'm sure
nobody gets it right.
I'm sure they'll come back next year and they'll probably run the bracket probably. Hydra moves on to fight Ribbot, which is another rematch. I suppose at this point, as we've kind of hinted before, the show's been going for so long. All those top teams, they do tend to converge quite often, and
it happens in sports all the time.
Exactly.
Every year they
rivalries get built.
No one cares.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Having seen that match last year, though, there's no way in hell Ribbot runs the horizontal, right?
I don't. Yeah, well, they
way.
can't.
Well, it's broken. So. It's broken already.
It is broken. But even if it was working, you've got to think. Right, this time we try the vert and see what happens.
Yes. That was really controversial last time that they fought, because both teams kind of play the attachment game, and there's
production loves that.
There was production hates that, and there was like some new rule where like you have to lock in your configuration. Like if you tell them like these teams are being kind of deceptive, the production team will make you lock in your configuration. So Hydra did something really funny. They're like, oh, we're just gonna run our standard piano key configuration. So the Ribbot team's like, oh, okay, well then we're gonna run our horizontal. But what Hydra didn't really tell them is that they welded all their piano keys together, essentially making it a static solid plow, which perfectly countered Ribbot. So I kind of enjoyed that, because I hate when people spend so long picking out configurations. Yeah, and Hydra didn't lie, but they were little disingenuous with like their intentions. But whatever.
There is a term used in sports in the UK called shithousery, and it was that is shithousery from Hydra. But we'll see how it goes this time. I know full well that Hydra has been, again, we've kind of said, quietly going about its wins this season, but Ribbot has started to kick up a bit of a head of steam now. So it's
the two bracket busters, last year's and this year's, finally settling last year's fight.
Absolutely, I can't wait for that one either. That's gonna be another.
Will it go the same way, or will we be talking?
Well,
about
it can't go the same way because movement is movement this year, and so
we won't have any of that nonsense this year.
Fight, yes.
So we'll see. Fight number 7, our penultimate fight.
Yeah. Have you heard my new mixtape?
They just strap mixtape onto the.
It looked like it, didn't they?
They may have done. Mad Catter and Huge.
The huge poon.
The huge poon didn't work. I can't believe they actually kept it in. It's unbelievable. And they tried something different. But for a 4-wheel drive vert, Huge is a tall problem. It is an issue that they all have. I did appreciate the fact that Mad Catter did manage to slice straight through Huge's wheel, but as soon as their weapon died and Huge just kind of kept knocking bits off the top of Mad Catter, there was only going to be one winner. Even though I have it from Jonathan himself, they also, I think they melted their weapon bearings in Huge this fight.
Oh.
Yeah. Huge uses a bunch of bushings this season, and they were having all sorts of problems with their bushings seizing up or melting or all sorts of this or that. But for the most part, it's been pretty reliable. But as we saw in this fight, it did go down. They got, I don't know, this is a pretty close fight. Like Huge has just been dominating every fight this season, and this was a close one. Mad Catter hits really hard.
Absolutely.
But
Sure does.
Huge is really good at sniping belts, aren't they? This is the bot that just it can hit you in places that you don't want to be hit, and it goes over the top. Every time I watch Huge fight now, it's almost like you're going through a toll gate, and you have to pay the toll. If you go through the Huge toll gate, you go underneath. You have to pay the toll. And
that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, you're gonna take a hit. There's nothing you can do.
The thing is as well, that's brilliant about Huge is they could just they like, obviously we saw in this fight they can just drive over you, but they can also then flip the kind of arms behind them and then have them spin down into you as well. It's just such
I'd love to see him try to lift with one of those at one point. That would be really funny.
Maybe.
I don't know if it's even possible.
It's such a... The thing is, I credit to Calvin for just driving at Huge and keeping the pressure on, because, I don't doubt that, aggression and control would probably, some of it must have gone to Mad Cat. It was probably closer than you might think with the judges, but that damage is all telling, isn't it? The weapon has gone on Mad Catter. Both weapons have gone on Mad Catter, and Huge still works, and that's all they need for a judge's decision, and which is quite rightfully what they got. It is a shame that we lose one of these two, because I know we said it last week, or the week before, whenever they fought, when we spoke to Jonathan. When you're losing one of these two teams, you're losing Martin Mason, who is, just exactly that. Perfect. Yeah. That's going to be the thumbnail now. Perfect. Thanks, Luke. But it's like, you lose a great character in Martin if Mad Catter goes, or Huge, which has been this, incredible story, and Jonathan is just like the nicest bloke ever, and you'd have to lose one of them, and it's not fair. I want both of them to go through, but yeah, shame for Catter.
Yeah, we're getting to that point where you don't want anybody to lose.
No, you don't.
We've talked with so many teams where you're like, oh, yay, oh. You're like, do I be happy or do I be sad?
Huge, but huge wins, but at what cost? Yeah. Catter season has looked pretty good. I mean, they finished 3-3.
Yep.
Yeah.
And their only losses are to Huge, LockJaw, and Riptide. So
Riptide, yeah.
No disgrace there. All three teams at least in the top 16. And the fact that they do always on such a small budget relative to everyone else. That's the thing. It's incredible that they kind of they eke every last dollar out of their budget, and they make a robot which if you compare it on budget, they probably have the smallest in the field.
Yeah, Jackpot might come in a little cheaper, but Mad Catter is definitely one of the cheaper robots, and the fact that they do so well with what they're working with is really impressive. The inside of Mad Catter is also, I think that robot has 9 motors in it, 9 motors, 9 speed controllers. It's a lot of redundancy. There's some redundancy, but a lot of redundancy can also cause you problems too, because if you lose 1 or 2 motors, then all the other motors have to pick up the slack, and then they overheat, and then they explode. So you can have these cascading failures. So it can be tricky to properly design redundancy into a combat robot, and a lot of teams struggle with that.
Absolutely.
There's an interesting sports analogy where it's always cool to see teams that go through. I mean, a lot of sports, there are salary caps where you can only have so many players on your team of a certain caliber. You can't just buy the most expensive players and put them all and make an all-star team. You got to stay under a certain salary so that there's parity. But it's always cool to see a team that doesn't spend such crazy amount of money and still are very competitive. And still eke out wins or dominate. It's always cool to see. So it's neat. It's neat to see that in BattleBots as well. So
yeah. Huge's next fight is Witch Doctor, which is another another 4-wheel drive vet.
I think this bodes well for them, doesn't it? Or does it?
On paper. Go on.
In previous seasons, especially like last season, I think the difference, like the last season Huge and this season Huge, are quite similar mechanically. And Huge, the production crew has always given Huge the worst matchups possible. Like, I think production knows that Huge is a meta-breaking design. So they would purposely feed them robots that they thought could beat Huge. And this season, where they give you the 4 fights ahead of time, you know who you're fighting. And then the way that the brackets have lined up, like Huge is actually doesn't have to fight those crazy robots anymore. Like in the previous seasons, they had to fight like Deep Six and like Uppercut and like one of the very few robots that can actually reach up and hit them. They've had to fight them.
I mean, they're running out.
And I always felt that it was pretty unfair to the Huge team, because if you go to any other competition, the small, like the featherweight competitions where we have featherweight Huges, it's completely random. It's a random bracket. They mix up the bracket, you fight whoever. And in all likelihood, you're statistically more likely for Huge to fight a robot that you are designed to beat. And I always thought that was not fair for Huge, but this season, they're fighting robots that they're designed to beat, and they're beating them.
I do feel that, in a way, production in choosing those fights have taught Huge how to fight anything, and have almost painted a picture in which they've made a bracket runner that could just take on anything and win. Like he's fought every and any weird attachment that he could possibly face, and can probably take them all on now. He knows what to expect and knows what to do with them.
Well, if you look on paper now, there's now only 2 robots that can reach Huge that are left, and they are SawBlaze and Hydra.
Yeah,
because Hydra, of course, has the silly big vert, doesn't it? So and it's also an ask for those two to get to the final to reach. You look on Huge's side, Witch Doctor. Okay, it's probably a scarier Mad Catter, and Mad Catter did do some work, but
it's a meta bot.
Exactly. Copperhead. Luke. God knows what you're going to do if you end up fighting Huge, and then Riptide. We saw them fight last year, but there was a lot of external factors. There was the false start, and there was other things. Huge going to win this. Are we?
Yeah,
it's
really. It really, when we saw the bracket, we look at their quarter of the bracket and thinking, wow, they could really come out of that, and say they end up facing a Riptide. I think it's possible, that they could, cause some issues. We've talked previously about Riptide's weapon, and we'll get into it when we start talking about this next fight, where it's really thin in a couple spots. And even the team have said it. If you hit it right in those spots, it's possible it could break. So it's one of those things where it's possible, with how scary this S-Blade has been for Huge. If they're up to speed and, get a really nice shot, you never know. But of course, we're thinking about the future that hasn't really been shown yet.
I was
going to say the future past.
It's so strange. It's such a strange sport.
Well, you've kind of mentioned Riptide. Should we talk about the last fight, which is? Jevon, I know you're emotionally hurt. Like this one.
I have Vietnam flashbacks watching this like that.
I suddenly strangely relate very much to Will Bales. We had the same experience. So once upon this is a bit of a tangent, but please go with me. My very first robot event that I went to with my Beetleweight, Couch Potato, back in 2020. I was fighting Milo and Let the Good Times Roll in the UK, and I got hit very hard, and I got entangled in the lights, and I got stuck there, and that was
hung there. It was the first public hanging since the 60s,
and that's where I was immobilized. I lost like that. I thought the same thing was going to happen to Hypershock.
Nearly did. One of the ears got caught on the light rig. It was up there, what felt like 3 decent seconds. It doesn't look as long in the footage that they played back, but it felt like forever that it was up there, and it was so up there. And there was, I remember at the time, all this talk of there's no way that a spinner can be spinning that fast and hit that hard and all that, and they must be breaking tip speed limits. But what you have to remember is that Will at that point was going full bore on Hypershock's disc.
Upside down.
Riptide was going full bore.
We just talked about
Riptide's,
this, double impact.
And just went for it, and weapon to weapon. I don't think Riptide's weapon has come out of that unscathed. I think that is too big a hit to that weapon for nothing to be wrong with it. I don't know.
Well, they're down to one anyway. This is their last weapon, isn't it? Because they lost one against Mad Catter, didn't they?
Yes.
So
yeah, I look forward to seeing any photos back of this fight. I will say that this is, other than the Black Dragon fight, I think this is the least controversial Riptide fight that there has been, which is a wonderful sentiment to say, and thank you for that. And everybody in the interview stayed classy, and it was good. It was nice to see robot combat for robot combat's sake, not for anything else.
Yeah, at the end of the fight, there was a little bit of colorful language, but I mean,
Well,
you're very excited. They were very
yes.
excited. I mean, come on,
They
you
do
hit the
need to
ceiling. You
they
hit
need
the
to tone
something
that down.
ceiling.
If you're roofing your opponent, I feel like you're entitled to a few
It's
beeps on TV. Come on now.
We spoke about
Good
Hydra
lord.
might have hit the roof with Death Drop. No, Riptide's hit the roof with Hypershock. There's no argument here. It is in the light rig, and that is as roofy as you can get without going through it.
Yeah. Are we underrating Ethan Kurtz as a driver?
Yeah, I think so.
You think?
I think so.
I think
I
he's
think
done
we've been talking
exceptionally well.
about other things with this team.
Yep.
And not talking about the driving. I'll also say I was having a chat with friend of the podcast Ryan Bratley, and the 2016 driving award winner has had a lot of driving mistakes with this version.
Oh man, I mean
the first half second. What was that?
Oversteered, and that was it. Game over at that point. It was all over in that one little oversteer.
Yeah.
Look, I can see itching.
It's kind of funny because we haven't even seen this like televised yet, but the last Amazon Remars, Hypershock
Where
won.
is it, BattleBots? Please.
Where is this? Hypershock won. They had the best competition they've ever had, but Will Bales was not the one driving. It was his wife Alex.
I know.
It's really funny because they have very different driving strategies here. Where like Alex when she was driving had faith in their ground game. So she kind of has a similar drive strategy that Endgame has, which is just kind of sit in the arena and point your robot at your opponent and have faith that you're going to win the ground game. But Will Bales, on the other hand, drives like a madman. He wants to do donuts. He wants to get fancy, which is great for TV. I think that makes the fights way more entertaining. And when he pulls it off, it makes for some of the best combat robot you've ever seen. Like you don't necessarily want robots to just go head to head, which is great. Yeah. But when you're actually able to showcase amazing driving, great speed, great finesse, and great destruction, those are probably the best fights if you can do it correctly. But in this case, Hypershock, like you said, like oversteered, exposed the wheel, and after that, they're done. Yeah, they're done. Like you can't make mistakes against a weapon as powerful as the one on Riptide.
No, I mean, Luke, you obviously must have had a little bit of vested interest in this fight. Who would you have rather fought if you were given the choice before the fight starts? Who would you have rather had?
I mean, I probably would have rather fought Hypershock to be honest. But at the same time, like we have a lot of footage to go back on with Hypershock. Like it's easier to strategize against Hypershock. We kind of know a little bit more on what to expect. They are a little bit more modular. Hypershock does have the ability to put all sorts of crazy attachments on, where we haven't seen a lot of attachments from Riptide. But at the same time, nobody at this point in the competition has hit Riptide. So we don't nobody has hit Riptide at all. Riptide's been very aggressive. Their weapon is very fast spin up, great drive. So the robot overall is a very high performance machine. But part of high performance in combat robots is your ability to take hits. And we have yet to see that. Nobody has actually hit Riptide.
And they have talked at length about being if you hit them in the right places, they are soft. It is. Yeah,
I think it's like it's an all aluminum robot. So I imagine if you hit them in the right places, it's just gonna take chunks out of their robot, and we haven't seen that yet. So if Hypershock got one good hit, if Hypershock was able to drift around them, hit him in the back, hit him in the side, it might have been their fight to win. It's just we don't know at this point if Riptide can take hits, and durability is a hugely important aspect of a good, well-rounded combat robot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Instead, Will decided to take flying lessons.
Yes.
It is a shame. It is a shame for Hypershock to end in this way. But again, you kind of look at their season. They finished at 3-3 as well.
It is one of those fights where
if you look at their losses. Okay, they've lost. Who they lost to? They've lost to. Who did they lose to first?
SawBlaze,
Endgame, and Riptide. Like, come on! If you're
there's some big caliber robots, and this is the thing that I love about Hypershock. I will take a Hypershock loss any day of the week, so long as it's entertaining. Yeah. And they are always entertaining. Will's upside down. There's not a lot of hope for what they're going to do. They're boxed into a corner. Riptide's coming towards them. What does he do? Weapon up to full speed. Let's go weapon to weapon. Let's see what happens. And that is what I love about Hypershock. It's what I love about the way that Will drives, and it's what I love about this team because they are always entertaining, always gracious in defeat, and always stay classy.
Yeah,
exactly.
This won't be the last time we see them. We'll see them. They're going to have to defend their honor in the Golden Bolt. Because
but there's no gatekeepers anymore.
No, there isn't.
There's
No.
not.
No, so we might
No
not see them.
gatekeepers.
We might
But
see them. We might not.
We may or may not see them.
Who knows?
See them.
Anyway,
Luke, your next fight is Riptide.
Kind of we're talking about it leading up into it, and there's a question we have here from Ezra Casey. I think I said that right on Facebook. What can you do to avoid the destructiveness of this robot in the next fight? You said no one's hit them, but how do you avoid being catastrophically hit by them?
Well, it's an interesting matchup because Riptide at this point has probably shown that they have the most destructive robot that we've seen. Like their weapon seems to just blast robots across the arena. But at the same time, though, I think Copperhead has shown that we're potentially the most durable robot if you hit us in the front. Yes, so I think it's interesting where it's like just hitting Copperhead could damage your own robot. It's like punching a sack full of concrete blocks or something. Like you can hurt yourself just from hitting us because we're so hard. So I think, and leading up to this fight, we're just coming off our win from Endgame, so I'm feeling awesome. We didn't take a ton of damage. We beat what I thought was like the best robot in the field. But now we're fighting Riptide. But I don't think I mentioned this, but I didn't even know how well Riptide was doing at this point in the competition. I think the first fight I saw Riptide do. I did watch some of the Black Dragon fight, and I watched the Hypershock fight, but I didn't watch any of the previous fights, so I didn't know any of the controversy. I didn't really see necessarily how devastating their weapon had been. Obviously we saw them launch Hypershock into the ceiling, but that was a combination of both robots doing that together. So I didn't really know what to expect. I knew that their drum is pretty wide, which means they can't put fork attachments any narrower than the width of their drum. So I wasn't too worried about any kind of crazy fork attachments. What I was going into this fight, I thought that we had a better advantage going weapon on weapon. Like when you try to get fancy with the driving, you're opening yourself up to risks and driving mistakes. It's always easiest if you can just win head-to-head encounters. And I thought we had an advantage in this fight in the head-to-head encounters. So I was actually feeling pretty good. As much as you can. So,
yeah, of course.
There's a lot on the line, but I was definitely more worried about Endgame than I was against Riptide at this point.
Food for thought for next week, at least. But
fighting talk.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Luke, thank you very much for your time. We have got one question to kind of lead you out on. It's kind of a 3-part question, but we'll try and make it as kind of trimmed down as we can do. So it's from friend of the podcast, Rob Weston. And Rob is a serial beat-the-weight builder over here. And we kind of combined it with 2 other questions from other builders from the UK. And the question is, if you were to build a robot of your own design to bring to BattleBots, what would it be? Someone called Henry Strangle, another friend of ours, said, would it be a 250-pound troll toll? Or Hopin asks, would it be a 250-pound plus scaled-up shuffling drum bus like you're kind of working on for the 30s at the moment? So the floor is yours.
Yeah. So I am, as much as I love Copperhead, I don't. It's not really a robot that I would design. We're currently working on a redesign, but it's completely being redesigned by Zach Goff, who's the original designer. He knows how to build a good drum. It's his baby. He knows how to build a good drum spinner. I don't know a lot about that, to be honest. So I'm more about building weird, quirky things. I like to build wacky robots that still kind of work as advertised. A while back, I was designing a 300-pound gyro walker that would be a scaled-up version of Kitten Mittens.
Yes.
But we never quite knew if a gyro walker we could convince Trey and Greg to give us a weight bonus. I always kind of thought that a little bit of a weight bonus, maybe not definitely not 100% weight bonus, but a little weight bonus.
Did Rex get a weight bonus? I don't know.
Rex did not get a weight bonus.
Right.
And I think part of the reason why Rex didn't maybe work as well as it could have been is because they didn't get a weight bonus. So they had to make compromises in the way its mobility. The original designer of Rex, one of the designers of Rex was Dan. Dan Chatterton. Is that his last name? I
think so.
Might have screwed that up. But the predecessor to Rex was a 2-pound ant weight called Gyrobot. And that actually had fantastic mobility. And that's what all of my gyro robots have been based off from. And it actually moves pretty well. But all of the robots I built have had some kind of weight bonus. So so you can kind of still make it competitive while dealing with the mechanical complexities to make it work in the first place. But there was a rumor that BattleBots is introducing. This is still a rumor. I don't know what's happening about this, but there were some talks about.
Grain of salt.
Take it with a grain of salt that there was talks about having a dedicated walker class for BattleBots.
Right.
The thinking was like building a 500-pound robot is just logistically too complicated. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. Like you couldn't pick it up with like 4 people. But we want to see more interesting designs. We don't want to just have ground scraping wedgelets, 4-wheel drive vertical spinners. We want to see more interesting designs. And if you have an entire weight class allocated just for unique mobility robots, you might be able to achieve put some new blood into robot combat. So there was talk about having a dedicated walker class that still weighs 250 pounds. And if that ever does come to fruition, I would definitely put my hat in the ring for like some kind of gyro walker or shuffler bot or something. Because you don't get, for a lot of the stuff that I know how to build, the unique mobility stuff, they don't get weight bonuses in BattleBots, so it doesn't make sense to really to build them because they would get absolutely destroyed by the current meta.
Well, look at
Chomp.
Yeah.
Chomp,
coolest looking thing, hits so hard but can't move.
Yeah, I mean that Chomp weighed 500 pounds and it still lost most of their fights. But if Chomp competed and it's a class just designed to fight other walkers, they might have had a better chance.
Yeah.
So I would love to build some kind of gyro walker, some kind of shuffler bot, a troll tool would be hilarious, but I don't think Greg would like to see that in the arena because it would destroy. It would just be cutting holes in everything. So yeah, I love building the wacky robots as long as they sort of work as advertised. But at this point, I'm just kind of riding the gravy train with Copperhead. So it's
and you should as well. I know we mentioned it at the start of the podcast, but a lot of the robots that you design and build are certainly unique, and they bring a lot of interest in. So thank you for doing what you do, Luke. It's honestly, it's a lot of the stuff you build is just so interesting compared to everything else.
Fun to watch.
Yeah,
it is always entertaining. So
yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm trying to I'm trying to push the sport forward. And I think that building unique designs kind of gets people thinking in different directions. Like you don't have to do the same thing that other people have done. And I think there's still a lot of robot designs out there that can be wacky and interesting and still be competitive. I mean, before Huge came out, like everyone thought that every design had been done. And then Huge comes out with this gigantic huge wheel robot. I mean, Gabriel is kind of in the same boat, but now Huge has a spinner, so it's a lot better. But no. It's a lot more competitive, I'll say. Not better. It's more competitive. So, and I think there's still more interesting robot designs out there that can be competitive. It's just people haven't really thought outside the box. So I'm just trying to try new things, see what works, see what doesn't work, keep things interesting, keep robot combat weird. And that's what I like.
All the credit to you, my dude.
Yeah. Small compact designs aren't always the answer. We talked about it earlier. Bigger designs, it's not always the answer to go small and compact and energy dense. Sometimes it's okay to stretch outside the box.
And that's what I like about robot combat is it's so open. It's like it's kind of that you can do it for different reasons. Like you can build art bots, you can build wacky robots. It's so open format that you can put anything in the arena as long as it meets the safety criteria and the weight. So going back in time, the whole reason why I'm in robot combat is because I saw Mark Satrakian's builds on the Comedy Central run. Like when I saw Mechadon and Snake as a little kid, that just blew my mind. Like I couldn't believe that you could build something that amazing and then try to compete with it. And those robots never won, but it just kind of got me thinking like, holy moly, like this is incredible. And so I'm as I'm getting better at CAD and becoming a better roboteer, like I'm trying to push the boundaries of like what you can do, and hopefully like it encourages other people to do the same.
And I hope that what Mark brought this time, if people came by and watched the show, that Walker, super cool Stalker, yes. That's that's good. Maybe that'll get the brain muscle working, for people saying, "Oh my God, this is possible."
It's very
not
cool.
just...
If you haven't seen it yet, I think Scorpio's Builder blog. If you look back at some of their like in the pits pre-season videos, they talk to Mark about Stalker and what it does and how it does it, and it's so cool. And we spoke to him as well on our last day in the pits and on our tour and had a brief chat with him. But seeing that thing working up close is very, very, very cool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That pretty much wraps everything up. Next week, we're not doing a podcast. I know.
Oh no!
What?
I know. So, for long story short, I've got a lot of robots to build very quickly. Jevon is on holiday.
I'm away.
So
less of a holiday, more of a taking a load of kids to the middle of the country to look after them for a week. So
okay, well,
that's not a holiday.
It's a stressful holiday, but we will do a podcast the week afterwards, reviewing the final and all the fallout from that. But yeah, Luke, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
And I hope
they're the best.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, I do hope.
No, you.
I hope if you do win, you'll come back and join us next week, right?
Yeah. If we take home the giant nut, we can do it all over again.
It's just off screen, right? It's just right. It's on the
Don't tell them. With all that said, I have been Sam Elliott 64.
I've been Steve, the American Killjoy.
I have been World of Woodrow.
And I'm Luke from Team Copperhead.
And the three of us will see you in a couple of weeks for the final of BattleBots. I hope you all enjoy it. We'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.